Hey guys, this is the video for lesson 26, session 2, and it begins on page 539. I just wanted to start off saying that if you are all caught up on videos and you're watching these like the day I post them, I'm sorry that they've been coming up at like weird times during the day, or if you are normally watching them like first thing in the morning and they're not there and ready. It's like having the worst time uploading lately. I don't know why or what's wrong. Maybe it's my internet, but usually they upload no problem overnight. But lately I've been waking up to check on the videos and they haven't uploaded. There's been an error or some kind of issue. So I'm sorry that's been such an issue. Hopefully you guys haven't been, sitting around waiting on videos, but if so, I'm sorry. Let's get started. Let's continue. So we're continuing our lesson on decimals. So changing fractions into decimals and just kind of understanding what decimals are. Okay? So let's try this problem. A soccer camp has places for 100 students. So far, 60 of the places are filled. Write both a fraction and a decimal in both hundredths and tenths to show the part of the 100 places for students that are filled. Okay, so there's 100 places total for students, or 100 spots open. And so far, 60 of the spots are filled. So that's easy as a fraction, right? So we'll do fraction first. And it said to write it in hundredths and tenths. So I'll do hundredths first because that's what they give it to us. In my fraction, it would be 100 as my denominator, right? There's 100 spots. So out of 100, how many are filled would be my numerator. There are 60 spots filled. Okay, so there it is as hundredths. I also need to write it as tenths. So if I write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 10 to be tenths, how did I get from 100 to 10? Well, I obviously didn't multiply by 100, but I went in the opposite direction. I divided by 100. So remember, to find an equivalent fraction, you can multiply or divide by the same number. So if we divided both numerator and denominator by 10, we're just kind of knocking off a 0, right? So 100 divided by 10 is 10. 60 divided by 10 is 6. So as a fraction, it is 60 hundredths, or 6 tenths. Now, as a decimal, I could do my place value chart for my decimal. My labels up there. So ones place, and then my decimal point goes right there. And remember, it's tenths, and then hundredths. Okay. All right, so how would you say this fraction? You would say this fraction 60 hundredths, right? So remember how you say a fraction. You say the ones place if there are any whole numbers, and the decimals and. If there's only something in the tenths place, then you say, whatever that number is, tenths. But if there's numbers here and here, you would say whatever that number is and then say hundredths. Okay, so as a fraction, it would be, or as a decimal, 60 hundredths. There's nothing in the ones place because there's no whole number in front. Okay? But you see that 0 there? So it's 60 hundredths. But you could also write it, just gonna do this quickly, it's not gonna be pretty. Tenths, hundredths, out of space. You could just write it like that, because this is 6 tenths. 6 tenths. And don't worry about the hundredths. Okay, so let's combine our information. 60 hundredths equals 60 hundredths. And 6 tenths equals 6 tenths. Okay, so this is our answer. these two. Here it is as a fraction with hundredths. Here it is as a decimal with hundredths. Because this is my tenths place, this is my hundredths place. Here it is as a fraction with tenths. Here it is as a decimal with tenths, because this is my tenths place. Okay? So hopefully that makes some sense. It might be still a little bit confusing, and it's hard because, you know, you guys are learning this from a video, and we're not at school doing it together, unfortunately. So pause the page if you need to catch up. Let's check out some models. Okay, on the back of that page, so on page 540, they have the same problem, and then they have some models. Okay, so for the first one, it shows like a fraction model, and here it is as hundredths because there's 100 spaces. 60 of them are colored in. It says 60 small squares are shaded, so 60 hundredths of the whole is shaded, and they wrote it as a fraction. On this one, it's tenths, and 6 of them are colored in, so it's 6 tenths. 6 tenths. Okay. Down here, they just show it as a place value chart. There are no ones, there's no whole numbers. Decimal point, there are 6 tenths or 60 hundredths. Okay. Let's answer some questions about it on the other side. Page 541, number 1. Okay, so it says we're going to use the problem from the previous page to help us understand how to write tenths and hundredths as fractions and decimals to name the same amount. So, number 1, look at the first modelet. So the fraction models on the other side of the page. The model on the left shows 60 squares shaded. Write a fraction for the model. So, this one. What fraction would that be? That would be 60 hundredths. And the model on the right shows 6 sections shaded. Write a model, or write a fraction for that model. That would be this one. That shows 6 tenths. Right? Number 2, how does the model on the right in the first modelet show the fraction you wrote for the model in problem 1? So, how does this show 6 tenths? Well, it's divided into 10 equal parts, and 6 of them are shaded. That's why it's 6 tenths. The model is divided into 10 equal parts, and 6 of them are shaded. That's why it is 6 tenths. Okay, number 3. Look at the place value chart in the second modelet. Write a decimal in tenths and the equivalent decimal in hundredths. How are the two decimals different? So this is the modelet they're talking about now, the place value chart. So we're just going to write that decimal, I keep saying fraction, this decimal, and then write the equivalent decimal in tenths. So it was 0 and 60 hundredths, which is equivalent to 0 and 6 tenths. And you can also write it just decimal 60 hundredths. That's just 60 hundredths. You don't say and 60 hundredths. You only say and if there's a whole number or something written in front. So this is technically like 0 and 60 hundredths, or you could just say 60 hundredths. 60 hundredths equals 6 tenths. Okay, so those are equivalent. And I just didn't write the 0 in front of the decimal on those ones. So how are the two decimals different? So how is this 60 hundredths different than the 6 tenths? There's a 0 in the hundredths place on this one. That's the only way they're different, right? There's a decimal point, there's a 6 in the tenths place, but this one has a 0 in the hundredths place. This one does not. But they mean exactly the same thing. This is equal to that. So, with 60 hundredths, there is a 0 in the hundredths place. That's the difference. Okay. Number 4, write a number on each line below to describe how decimals relate to fractions with denominators of 10 and 100. So if the denominator of a fraction is 10, the equivalent decimal has blank place after the decimal point. So if the denominator of a fraction is 10, like whatever the numerator is, doesn't matter. Can you guys see that? There you go. So if the denominator is 10, then here's my decimal point. After my decimal point, how many digits would be after the decimal point? It would be 1. If it's tenths, then there's only going to be something in the tenths place. If the denominator is 100, after the decimal, there's going to be something in the tenths place, but there's also going to be something in the hundredths place because it's hundredths. Tenths place, hundredths place. Okay, so there are 2 spaces, 2 place values after the decimal point. The equivalent decimal has 2 places after the decimal point. Okay, so that's your answer, 1 and 2. This is just me showing what that means. Okay. Number 5, reflect. Why does it look so crooked? Can't get it straight on the page. Okay. What's your favorite model? What's your favorite strategy? Do you like the fraction models? Do you like place value charts? What's your favorite way? And tell me why for the reflect. And then turn the page, please. Okay, number 6. Write a decimal equivalent to 2/10. Draw a model that shows the fraction and the decimal. Show your work. So let's draw the fraction model for 2/10 first. So I have my little square fraction model that they've been showing. There's half, and then I need 5 on each half. 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so 2/10. I need to color in 2 of those tenths. 1, 2. All right, so that model shows 2/10. Now I need to show it as a decimal. It says write the decimal that's equivalent. So I'm going to do a quick place value chart. Why can't I draw straight lines today? Goodness. Okay. Ones, decimal point, tenths, hundredths. Okay. So, is there a whole number in front of the fraction? No. No whole number. You don't have to put anything here, or you could put a 0. And there's a decimal point. So this fraction, 2/10, is my decimal. 2/10. How many tenths are there? There are 2 of them. That's it. There's nothing in the hundredths place. Okay, so it's just 2/10. So as a decimal, looks like that. Or just like that, but typically like that. Okay, so the equivalent decimal is 0 and 2/10. 0 wholes and 2/10. 0 and 2/10. Okay. All right, number 7. Write a decimal equivalent to that fraction. 83 hundredths. Okay, so you say it the same way as you would say the decimal. I'll do a place value chart though. ones, decimal point, tenths, hundredths. Okay. There are no whole numbers in front of the fraction part. So there's 0 in the ones place. There's no whole numbers. And then 83. 83. 0 and 83 hundredths. 83 hundredths. 83 hundredths. You say them the same way. So the equivalent decimal is 83 hundredths, or 0 and 83 hundredths. And this is going to look confusing because there's a decimal point right here, but I need a period to end these sentences, and I don't like doing that because I don't want to confuse you guys. Like, no number has 2 decimal points. Maybe I can do a different color. This is a period, not a decimal point. This is a period, not a decimal point. I'm just ending my sentence. Maybe I can... There, that's my answer. That's my answer. That's a period. Don't want to confuse you. Okay. Number 8. Ooh, this one's a good one. Okay, write the mixed number 7 and 9/10 as a decimal. Show your work. Okay, place value chart. Wish they had already written these out for me. I don't like writing place value charts, because apparently I can't draw straight lines. Next would be tenths, then hundredths. And then it goes on and on and on in the other direction too. So you know, like this way, past ones is ones, and then tenths, and then hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, all the way, you know, that we learned. And then this way is tenths, hundredths, and then it goes on past hundredths to thousandths and 10,000ths and 100,000ths, but we're not worrying about those right now because we're in 4th grade and we only know these two. Okay, so is there a whole number in this fraction? Yeah, there's a 7. Change colors. 7. There are 7 ones. 7 ones. After the decimal is my fraction part, my part less than 1. So here's my part less than 1. It says 9/10. So there's going to be a 9 in the tenths. Nothing in the hundredths. Okay, you can put a 0 there because 7 and 9/10 equals 7 and 90 hundredths. 7 and 9/10 equals 7 and 90 hundredths, right? Because 9/10 is equivalent to 90 hundredths. I just have some zeros on the end. Okay, so those are the same and those are the same. So you can put a 0 there. So it's 7 and 9/10. So you can put a 0 there, or you don't have to. You can just leave that blank. Is the decimal 7 and 9/10. Okay, practice page. Page 543. All right, so the example is already done, but it shows 7/10 over here. On this one, it shows 70 hundredths. So it shows that those fractions are equivalent, right? Same amount of space is colored in, same amount of space is colored in. So the decimals are also equivalent. 7/10 is equivalent to 70 hundredths, because that's exactly how you say it. 7/10, 70 hundredths. That says 7/10, that says 70 hundredths. They're the same thing. They're equivalent. Okay, so number 1. Yay, they wrote the place value charts for me. Gosh, how did they know? Okay, write the decimal equivalent to 7/10 in the place value chart. Okay, so there's no whole numbers, so there's a 0 in the ones place. How many tenths are there? 3/10. That's it, 3/10. That's how you say that. 3/10. 3/10. You say them the same way. Are you getting that? I can't tell if you're getting that because I can't hear you. I can't see what you're working on. But hopefully you're getting that. You say them the same way. 3/10. 3/10. Okay. Number 2, write the decimal equivalent to 55 hundredths in the place value chart. There's no whole number, so 0 ones. After the decimal is the fraction part, so there's 55 hundredths. I don't put 2 numbers in a place value chart in one spot in the chart, right? That'd be crazy. Just wild. 55 hundredths. Because if you look at just 55, there's 5 tens and 5 ones. 5 tens, 5 ones. But it goes in the other direction because it's less than 1. So in the tens place, really in 50, there's a 5. In the ones place, even though it's really hundredths, is 5. Sorry if I'm confusing you more. 55 hundredths, 55 hundredths. Number 3, write a decimal equivalent to 75 hundredths. Okay, there's no whole number, so I can write 0 and, or I could just do a decimal. 75 hundredths. 75 hundredths. Okay, either one of those is perfect. Awesome, back page. Do you guys like decimals? Is it making sense? I can't hear your answer, but I hope it makes sense. Number 4, what is 2 5/10 written as a decimal? Okay, well, there's a whole number 2, so I can automatically take out A because that says 0. And this one says 5 wholes. There has to be a 2 in front of the decimal, so either one of those look good so far. But the fraction part is 5/10. This says 2 5 hundredths, because this is the hundredths place. This says 2 5/10, because this is the tenths place. So 2 5/10 is right there. 2 and, because the decimal says and, 5, because there's the number 5, and that's in the tenths place, so I write tenths. This one, though, the wrong one, is 2, and that number there is 5, but what place is the 5 in? That's the hundredths place, so that one says 2 5 hundredths. Okay, and that's wrong. We want it to say 2 5/10, like the fraction. So hopefully you thought C was the correct one also. Number 5, what decimal is equivalent to 80 hundredths? Shade the model below to show the fraction and the decimal, then write the decimal. So first thing, I need to shade in the model they already drew for me. Thank goodness they already drew it for me because I don't want to write 100 little boxes, 80 of them. So I'm going to color in 80 squares, but 8 columns. So I don't have to count each little square. I can just make sure to color in 8 of those columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep. All right, so what decimal would be equivalent to that? Well, there's no whole number, so I don't have to write anything in front of my decimal point. I could put a 0 there if I wanted to, but it's going to be 80 hundredths. 80 hundredths. Yay! Number 6, look at problem 5. Shade the model below to show an equivalent fraction and decimal in tenths. Then write the fraction and decimal. So I just need to shade in the same amount. Well, I know 80 hundredths up here is going to be equivalent to 8 tenths down here. So I need to color in 8 of these bars, 8 of these equal parts on my model. Okay. So the fraction for that was 8 tenths. The decimal for that is 8 tenths. Ta-da! Okay, number 7. Use what you know about equivalent fractions to explain why 8 tenths and 80 hundredths are equivalent. Okay, so 8 tenths and 80 hundredths are equivalent because 8/10 is equivalent to 80/100. That doesn't really answer the question, right? Because I'm just restating the same thing. 8/10 and 80/100 are equivalent because 8/10 is equivalent to 80/100. I have to show why they're equivalent. So I'm going to say because, again, this is not a great sentence, but 8/10 times 10 in the numerator times 10 in the denominator equals 80/100, right? 8/10, you multiply both numerator and denominator by 10, it's going to give you 80/100. So, 8/10 is equivalent to 80/100. That's everything. That's the whole lesson. Hopefully it uploads okay. I've been having so much difficulty with it. Hope you guys are doing okay with fractions. I'd love it if you let me know in the comments down below how you're feeling about this. In my class, we do like the 1, 2, 3, or 4 scale. 1 is like, I have no idea what I'm doing. What is this? Is this a different language? 2 is like, I'm doing okay with this. I could use some more help though. 3 is, I'm doing okay with it. I don't need help, but I'm not confident enough to teach it to somebody else. 4 is, I love this. I know it. I could teach it to a friend if I needed to. I probably know it better than Mrs. Flitton. Okay, so in the comments, let me know, how do you feel about decimals and fractions so far, okay? See you in the next video for session 3. Bye-bye.